Hey guys, welcome back to 90 Feet From Home. I'm your host Ashley, and today we are going to talk about the injured list and the restricted list. Now, if injured list sounds a little bit new and like something you haven't heard before, that's because prior to the 2019 season, the injured list was referred to as the disabled list. Now, for obvious reasons, this had to be changed, and the injured list is actually just a better representation of what the list means, because the injured list and the restricted list are both different things. So first, let's get into what the injured list is all about. Now, the injured list exists so that teams can place players on that list in order to be able to call up and use healthy players. So there are two different types of injured lists, the 10-day and the 60-day. And the 10-day is sort of a new invention as well, because prior to 2017, it was a 15-day disabled list. And the restrictions of a list that long meant that teams were a little hesitant to place players on that list because it meant that they weren't able to use those players. And in cases of less serious injury, they may not be so inclined to place a player on that list and just kind of hope for the best, which wasn't always the greatest thing for those players. With the introduction of a 10-day injured list, this meant that teams could place players on that list and use them much sooner than the 15-day list, which was a better opportunity for players to have time to heal and teams to be able to call up healthy players. Now, the 60-day injured list is kind of a misnomer because if a player is placed on that 60-day list, the chances of them actually returning within 60 days are very, very slim. The 60-day list is typically used for players who may miss most of the rest of the season or at least an extended stretch of time well beyond 60 days due to very serious injury or even surgery. When a player is placed on the injured list, either the 10 or 60 day, it opens up a spot in the active roster, giving that team an opportunity to pull somebody up, typically from the minor leagues, to fill that position while the player heals, undergoes surgery, or whatever it is that they're going through, depending on which list they're on. So they can use a player from the minors, like I said, a free agent, another player who has just come back off the injured list, or even somebody that they get via a trade. The only important thing is that that player must be on the team's 40-man roster in order for them to be able to activate him. If he's not on the 40-man roster, then that's a whole other kettle of fish. And I'm going to put up the video on 25 and 40-man rosters over here so you guys can get a better idea of how that works and how somebody is activated onto the 40-man roster. But in order to be used in place of an injured player, that player must be on the 40-man roster. So a couple notes on how the injured list works. Regardless of which of the two lists a player is put on, the 10 or the 60, they may not return to play until that specific number of games has elapsed. So if they're on the 10-day injured list, they must be on that list for 10 days, and they cannot come back sooner than that 10-day period. The same is true of the 60-day injured list. So you can see why teams wouldn't rush to put a player on the 60-day injured list, because it does mean that they're out for at least 2 months and there's no way to bring them back any sooner. If a player is put on that 60-day injured list after August 1st, they lose their eligibility for postseason play. It's also worth noting that a player can be moved from the 10-day injured list to the 60-day injured list at any time during the duration of those 10 days, but a player cannot be moved from the 60-day injured list to the 10-day injured list. Another important thing to know is that the team's 40-man roster must be full in order for a player to be put on the 60-day injured list, although the player on the 60-day injured list is not required to be one of the 40 people on that roster. That's kind of interesting, actually, I think. Also worth noting that even if a player is on the 60-day or 10-day injured list, they can continue to go to games with their team. So you'll often see guys who are undergoing, rehab for surgeries or who have suffered minor injuries will continue to go with the team on road games. They'll be in the dugout. They're just ineligible to play during the period of their time on the injured list. For more serious recovery times, for things like Tommy John surgery or for more serious injuries, you'll often see those guys go home and not appear with the team for the rest of the season. They'll be spending their time in rehab or doing baseball activities that are mild to help them get back in shape. But in those instances, it's usually a lot easier for them to do that recovery at home as opposed to going with the team on the road when they're not anticipating playing for the remainder of the season. For shorter stints like those on the 10-day injured list, it is more likely that you'll see that player in the dugout throughout throughout the period of those 10 days. Now, there's an alternative to placing a player on the injured list even if they have been injured, and this is referring to the player as being day-to-day. So if a player happens to get hit with a ball or experience an injury on the field, and the team does not believe that this injury is serious enough to warrant them going on the 10-day injured list, the team can list them as being day-to-day, which means they don't need to necessarily participate in games, but it allows that player an opportunity to kind of sit on the bench, recoup, do what needs to be done in order to get them back into playing shape without being restricted to 10 days on the injured list. This also gives the team a little bit of time to place them on the injured list if need be. The team has up to 10 days after that player last appeared in a game to retroactively place them on the 10-day injured list. Now, there are a couple of different ways to restrict a player's access to play beyond the injured list, and there are a couple of different ones, so we're going to go into them. Some are referred to as a restricted list, which means the player is restricted from play, and we're going to go through a couple of different reasons a player may not be able to participate in games and how those work. The concussion list exists for players who may be showing signs or risk of a concussion, and the team just wants time in order to monitor them to make sure that those concussion symptoms aren't worrying in the long term. This is a bit of a shorter stint than the injured list at 7 days. So if a player is placed on the concussion list, it means they must be seated for 7 days in order to determine that they are in good health in order to return to play. If a player is put on the concussion list but not activated within 10 days, they're automatically put on the 10-day injured list as a result. There's also paternity leave or the paternity list. A player whose spouse is about to deliver a baby is allowed 1 to 3 days to leave their team and go be with their spouse for the birth of that child. This also means the team is able to replace that player's roster spot without losing a player. A player can also be put on the bereavement list if an immediate family member is seriously ill or a family member has died. So this is a minimum of 3 games and a maximum of 7. So the restricted list is different from all of this in that it represents kind of a player who is untouchable by other teams, but also not planning to be used by their current team. And a player can be put on the restricted list if they fail to report to their team within 10 days of the start of the season, or fail to come to a contract with their team within 10 days of the start of the season. A player can remain on that restricted list for up to 2 years, and while a player is on that restricted list, they don't count towards a team's active player list. The player can also be placed on a suspended list, which means that the team can suspend that player for something like insubordination, failure to live up to terms of their contract, or misconduct, or not being able to play, and not for injury reasons, but, showing up drunk and unable to play. A player can be suspended for those reasons. They will, however, remain on a team's active list. The temporarily inactive list would be for a player who needs to leave for an extended period of time due to lengthy family illness, or perhaps a player who wants to sign with a foreign league, or for any kind of a personal obligation that will take that player away from baseball for an extended period of time. The team can then choose to place that player on the temporarily inactive list, and those players do count towards a team's reserves, but not towards their active list. And last but not least, there's the voluntarily retired list, which I know sounds strange because if a player retires, are they not done? Are they gone? Why do they count towards anything? But if a player announces their retirement, they're usually replaced on the voluntary retirement list. This actually gives the player an opportunity to change their mind and come back from that voluntary retirement, but they cannot do so until 60 days from the end of the season have elapsed. Also, because this player is under contract, they cannot go and play baseball anywhere else without the consent of the team to which they are contracted. And much like the restricted list, a player can remain on this list for up to 2 years before being removed. So there you go, guys. A little bit of a deep dive into what the injured list, the restricted lists, and different kinds of lists that players can be placed on during a season and what they mean and what their regulations are. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, give it a big thumbs up down below. While you're down there, remember to click on that subscribe button and ring the bell if you want to be notified every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday when a new episode goes live. Of course, please remember to leave comments down below. I love reading them. I love replying to them. If you have episode suggestions or questions for me, feel free to leave them down below and they may end up being future episodes. And of course, you guys can follow me on social media where I'm at 90 Feet From Home on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So until next time, guys, have an awesome one. We'll see you later. Bye!